In the fall of 1988, the sky above Montana was the color of old copper. The Yellowstone fires had been burning since June. 100 miles to the southwest, the park was consumed by the largest wildfire in its recorded history, and the smoke had drifted north and east until it sat above the high plains like a permanent dusk. People drove with their headlights on at noon. The air tasted of something you could not name. And in the small coal and cattle town of Roundup, in central Montana, life moved forward through that strange amber light, the way life in hard country towns always moves forward, with its head down and its work still to do. On the afternoon of September 14, 1988, Samuel Fox was in the backyard of the house on Meade Street. He was 3 years old. He was wearing his red jacket, the one with the NASA patch on the sleeve that he called his rocket jacket. Because the word NASA was beyond him and rocket was not, and he was doing what 3-year-olds do in a backyard on a September afternoon, moving through the world at the level of dandelions and beetles, and the slow, interesting business of being very small in a very large place. His sister Marlene was 8 years old. She was supposed to be watching him. For 3 minutes she wasn't. In those 3 minutes, Samuel Fox vanished from the backyard on Meade Street. He was not found. He was not heard from again. And the man who took him that afternoon went on to live an ordinary life for 38 years. Fixing things, paying taxes, growing old, while Samuel's family lived something else entirely. What brought Roy Driscoll into a Musselshell County courtroom in November of 2025, at the age of 71, to plead guilty to the murder of a 3-year-old boy he had taken on a September afternoon in 1988, was not a confession. It was not a witness. It was a jacket. And a dewy stop on a highway outside Billings, and a detective in Helena who had been sending that jacket to new labs every few years since 2019, refusing to believe that the technology had run out of things to say. This is Samuel's story. And it has been a long time coming. Roundup, Montana, takes its name from the cattle drives that passed through the Musselshell River Valley in the late 1800s, the great seasonal gathering of livestock before the long journey south to market. By 1988, the cattle were still there, and so was the coal, pulled from the seams that ran beneath the high plains, and the town had built itself around both industries in the way that Montana towns build themselves, practically without ornament, with the kind of stubbornness that is indistinguishable from pride. The population held around 2,000 people. There was a grain elevator visible from most streets. There was a K-12 school, a small hospital, and a bar on First Avenue that had been there since before most of its current customers were born. If your truck broke down on the state highway at midnight, 3 people would stop before you had time to feel stranded. Dale Fox had worked a shift at the coal operation for 6 years before a back injury moved him to ranch work in 1986. He was 32 that fall, quiet in the way that certain men are quiet, measuring himself by how early he started and how late he finished, not given to asking for things he couldn't see a clear way to repay. Connie Fox, née Connie Purdy, from a farm family 2 counties west, worked 3 mornings a week at the Roundup grocery, doing inventory and covering the register when it got busy. She made her grandmother's chili every Sunday, regardless of the season. She kept the house on Meade Street the way her own mother had kept their farm, without fuss and with considerable order. Marlene was 8 in 3rd grade and had a Nintendo cartridge she'd gotten for her birthday in July that she had already played through 3 times. She was responsible in the way that older children in certain families absorb responsibility, not as a burden, but as a fact. A thing that was true about her, and that she did not question. Samuel was 3. He had brown hair and his father's wide-set eyes, and a laugh that arrived fast and left slowly. He had perhaps 60 words he could say clearly, and another 40 that only Connie could fully translate. He called trucks Biggs because he could not manage the word and had decided that this was sufficient. He was afraid of the drain in the bathtub. He would press himself against the far wall and watch it in complete solemnity as the water went down, as though keeping careful inventory of the threat. He wore the red jacket whenever the temperature dropped, and sometimes when it didn't. He had named it himself. Rocket Jacket. He was 3. These things made sense. He was supposed to start preschool in January. Outside, the Yellowstone smoke had made the September air strange and yellowish and close. The mountains to the west were invisible in the haze. People mentioned it the way they mentioned weather, something to be moved through. Nobody thought it would be the last ordinary day for a long time. September 14th, 1988, was a Saturday. Dale was at a neighboring ranch doing weekend work on a fence line. Connie had driven to the grocery at 12:30 to help receive a delivery that had arrived late. Before she left, she told Marlene to keep Samuel in the backyard and to stay where she could see him. Marlene understood. She always did. At approximately 2:00 in the afternoon, both children are in the yard. Marlene has her jump rope. Samuel is at the far side of the yard, crouched near the back fence in the way he always crouches. Low, intent, wholly absorbed in whatever small thing has his attention. At approximately 2:05, a girl from 2 houses down calls to Marlene from the side fence. She has found something in the alley, a cat with kittens, she says. She wants Marlene to come see. Marlene crosses the yard to the side fence. She will say later that she was gone for maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. She could still see the back fence from where she stood. She could not see Samuel from where she stood. When she turns back, Samuel is not at the fence. She looks toward the house. She looks toward the garden. She calls his name the way you call a 3-year-old's name when you are not yet frightened, short, assuming he will answer. He doesn't answer. She calls again. She walks to the back fence. The gate, a wooden gate with a drop latch, always kept closed, that Connie checked every morning, is standing 3 inches open. Marlene runs inside. She calls through every room. She runs back outside. She runs into the alley behind the fence and stands there in the strange copper light and looks in both directions at a lane that is empty in both directions. She is 8 years old. She understands, in the way that certain moments deliver their meaning before the mind is ready for it, that something is very wrong. At 2:22 in the afternoon, she calls Connie at the grocery. Connie is back at the house on Meade Street by 2:35. Dale is reached by the ranch's landline and arrives home by 3:10. The Musselshell County Sheriff's Office begins searching by 3:45. By 5 o'clock, neighbors are spread across the surrounding streets and alleys. Samuel's name fills the hazy autumn air above Roundup until dark comes, and keeps coming, and the search is suspended, and there is nothing. Samuel Fox did not come home that night. He did not come home after that. Deputy Walt Pruitt of the Musselshell County Sheriff's Office was the first law enforcement officer on the scene that September afternoon, and he worked the case with more personal investment than the job required. He was 30 years old, a Roundup native who had gone to school with men who now worked alongside Dale Fox, and he treated the investigation with the care of someone who understood that getting something wrong here was not a recoverable error. He drove every road within 5 miles of the Fox property that night. He did not go home until 2 in the morning. The Montana Division of Criminal Investigation arrived Monday and took the lead. A door-to-door canvass of the neighborhood turned up no witnesses to anything unusual on the afternoon of the 14th. No one had seen a vehicle they did not recognize. No one had seen a child in the alley. The gate, and what its 3-inch opening suggested, remained the only physical detail pointing beyond the yard. Investigators looked hard at every adult male within 4 blocks of the Fox property. A seasonal ranch worker with a prior petty theft arrest was questioned at length and released within 48 hours. A registered offender in Billings with loose ties to Roundup was investigated and eliminated by the end of the 2nd week. Connie and Dale were both interviewed 3 times and treated throughout as what they were, a family whose son was gone. One name moved through the process quickly and without much friction. Roy Driscoll had been renting a house on Meade Street 2 doors down from the Foxes since April of 1988. He was 34 years old, originally from Missoula, doing odd jobs around town, handyman work, seasonal labor. He was quiet, lived alone, had no record. He had a yellow Labrador named Pete. Samuel had been fascinated by Pete since the spring, would stop from half a block away and point and say "big dog" with the complete conviction of someone spotting something remarkable, and Driscoll had let him pet the dog several times, always with a Fox parent nearby. Investigators interviewed Driscoll on September 17th. He said he had been home that afternoon and had not seen or heard anything unusual. He was cooperative. Nothing on his record gave investigators a reason to look harder. He was cleared. He moved to Billings in January of 1990. In March of 1989, a farmer turning ground along a drainage ditch 1.5 miles from the Fox property found a small red jacket snagged in the brush at the ditch's edge. It had a NASA patch on the sleeve. Connie Fox identified it without hesitation. The jacket was collected, logged into evidence, and sent to the Montana Crime Lab. The technology available in 1989 could not extract a usable DNA profile from the degraded fabric. The jacket was sealed and placed in evidence storage in Helena. It would stay there for 33 years. Dale Fox was diagnosed with lung cancer in the spring of 2008. He had worked in the mines for a long time. He died in February of 2009 at 53 years old, having spent 20 years carrying a question no one had been able to answer for him. He never knew who had taken his son. Connie Fox still lives in the house on Meade Street. Marlene offered, more than once over the years, to help her move to Billings, somewhere with less of the specific weight that a small town places on the address where something terrible happened. Connie declined each time. She said the house was still the last place Samuel had been. She didn't explain what that meant. She didn't need to. Marlene Fox is 41 years old and lives in Billings. She works in hospital administration. She has 2 children of her own, and she has spent 38 years with the knowledge, absorbed at age 8 and never fully set down, that she looked away for 3 minutes and her brother disappeared. She knows it was not her fault. She has been told this by therapists, by her mother, by her husband, by every rational structure her adult mind has been able to construct around that September afternoon. The knowledge and the feeling are different things, and they do not always arrive together. If Samuel's story found you today, subscribe so you're here when the next case breaks. These families deserve to be followed. Back to Samuel. In 2019, the Montana Department of Justice launched an initiative to review cold case evidence using updated forensic science. Detective Sandra Keel was assigned the Fox file. She was 44 years old, a former Cascade County violent crimes investigator who had spent 15 years working cases before joining the cold case unit. She read the file in 2 days. On the 3rd day, she drove to Helena to look at the jacket in person. She requested it be sent to a private forensic laboratory in Seattle, specializing in low-template DNA extraction, a method capable of recovering usable material from biological samples too degraded for conventional analysis. The lab returned an inconclusive result in April of 2020. Keel sent the jacket to a second lab in 2022. That lab returned a partial DNA profile in February of 2024, incomplete, insufficient for a CODIS search on its own. She called Connie Fox on September 14, 2024, as she had every year since taking the case. She told her the profile wasn't there yet. She didn't say that she had begun to wonder if it ever would be. 3 weeks later, something changed. On the night of October 4, 2023, Roy Driscoll was pulled over on Highway 87 outside of Billings. He was 69 years old, driving a 2009 pickup, and he registered a blood alcohol level of .11 at the roadside. He was cited for Dewey, processed at Yellowstone County Jail, and released the following morning. As part of Montana's standard booking procedure, a buccal swab was collected and submitted to the state's DNA database. Nobody was thinking about a missing child from 1988. There was no reason to be. A Dewey is a Dewey. The swab entered the Montana Combined DNA Index System in December of 2023. The system runs automated comparisons on a regular schedule, new profiles checked against stored evidence profiles, evidence profiles checked against new submissions, thousands of comparisons running in the background of ordinary law enforcement work. The partial profile from Samuel's red jacket, extracted from the collar lining, which had been shielded from the worst of the moisture damage by the jacket's synthetic outer shell, was already in the system, flagged for comparison. On the morning of February 11, 2024, an automated match notification arrives in Detective Keel's queue. She is at her desk in the Helena office. She opens the notification. A partial profile from evidence item 88 MSL 047, the jacket, has returned a probable match to a DNA profile in the state system. The match belongs to a Yellowstone County Dewey arrest from October 2023. She reads the name, Roy Driscoll. She closes the window. She opens it again. She reads the name a second time. She sits back in her chair and stays very still for a long moment, and then she says something that she will later decline to include in any official record. Then she picks up the phone. The partial match was not sufficient for immediate arrest. It required corroboration. Over the following 6 weeks, investigators conducted a covert review of Driscoll's current life in Billings. He was living in a second-floor apartment on the south side of the city, semi-retired, doing occasional handyman work. He had no record beyond the Dewey. He had no family nearby. He had been, for 34 years, unremarkable in the manner of someone who had made unremarkableness a practice. A court-authorized secondary sample was collected covertly in March of 2024 and sent immediately to the state lab. The comparison came back in early April. It was a match. Roy Driscoll's DNA was on the collar of the jacket Samuel Fox had been wearing the afternoon he disappeared from the backyard on Meade Street. Detective Keel called Connie Fox on April 9, 2024. She told her there was a suspect, that he was alive, that he had been living 40 miles from Roundup for more than 30 years, that she intended to make sure he answered for what he had done. There was a long pause on the line. His name, Connie said. Keel told her. Roy Driscoll had grown up in Missoula, a mechanic's son, 2 younger brothers, a mother who worked the school cafeteria. He had moved through western Montana in his 20s, working odd jobs that never quite anchored him to a place, arriving in Roundup in April of 1988 for work that did not materialize, and staying through inertia and cheap rent. His neighbors on Meade Street described him the way certain men are always described, kept to himself, but not in a way that raised anything. He shoveled the walk in winter without being asked. He returned things he borrowed. He had a yellow Labrador named Pete that was friendly and patient with children, and the dog was, in those months, the reason the Fox children knew his name. Samuel had always wanted to go to Pete. He had been allowed to pet the dog on several occasions, always with a parent nearby. He would have followed Pete anywhere. He would not have known not to. The investigation that followed the Dina match confirmed what the physical evidence had already implied. Driscoll had used the dog. The back alley, the stretch that Marlene could not see from the side fence, gave him the 30 seconds he needed. Samuel's remains were located in June of 2025 in a rural area of Musselshell County, on land that Driscoll had briefly had access to in the fall of 1988. Records confirmed he had done repair work for the property's owner that October. The identification was made through DNA comparison against Connie Fox's reference sample. Samuel was brought home 37 years after the jacket had been found in the drainage ditch. Roy Driscoll was arrested at his Billings apartment on the morning of April 23, 2025. Two detectives and a uniformed officer knocked on the door at 7:15 a.m. He answered in a bathrobe. He looked at the badge the lead detective held toward him. He looked at the faces behind it. "I figured this was coming," he said. He said nothing further without an attorney. He was charged with deliberate homicide in the first degree. He maintained his innocence through May of 2025. Then, facing DNA evidence, physical evidence confirmation, and a trial date that was not going to move, he instructed his attorney to enter plea discussions. On November 7, 2025, Roy Driscoll stood before a Musselshell County judge and entered a guilty plea. He was 71 years old. He did not speak to the court. He looked at the floor. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marlene Fox sat in the front row of the gallery and did not look away for a single moment of it. When the judge asked if anyone from the family wished to be heard, Marlene stood. She stood in that courtroom, in the town where her brother had disappeared when she was 8 years old, and she spoke for 7 minutes. She said many things. The line that the Billings Gazette quoted the following morning was this: "She did not take her brother. She was 8 years old. She knows that now." There is a photograph of Samuel Fox from the summer of 1988, taken at a family barbecue at Connie's parents' farm, 2 counties west. He is wearing the red jacket. This is July, and the jacket is too warm for it, but he had insisted on it with the complete conviction that 3-year-olds bring to the things that matter to them. He is not looking at the camera. He is looking at something just outside the frame, to his left, with an expression of total focus, eyebrows together, mouth slightly open, the face of someone who has just spotted something worth investigating. A big dog, maybe, a truck on the road, a beetle in the grass. That is who Samuel was. Not a case file, not a jacket in an evidence locker, not a name on a cold case list in Helena. He was a 3-year-old boy who called trucks bigs and was afraid of the bathtub drain and wore a rocket jacket in July because no one could talk him out of it, and who was, in the last afternoon of his life, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing, being small and curious and alive in the world. In a backyard that was safe, in a town that was safe, in a yard that he had every reason to believe was safe. Connie Fox, asked what the guilty plea meant to her, said, "It means his name gets to be the last word." Not the question. She is still in the house on Meade Street. Marlene Fox said in a statement in December of 2025 that she had been carrying something that never belonged to her, that the weight of 3 minutes of a neighbor girl finding kittens in an alley and calling her name was not something an 8-year-old child should have had to carry into her 40s. She had carried it anyway. She said she intended, finally, to put it down. Cases like Samuel's leave questions that stay past the verdict. How many Roy Driscolls are out there? Men who were cleared in the first sweep, who simply relocated, who trusted that a few decades of unremarkableness would be enough distance. What do we owe to the investigators who send the same piece of evidence to a new lab, year after year, because they are not willing to let the file decide it's over? And what did it cost Marlene? What does it still cost for someone who has spent 38 years carrying something that was never hers to carry, to finally, in a courtroom in Roundup, Montana, be allowed to set it down? Leave those questions in the comments. Tell us what part of Samuel's story stayed with you. Justice came for Samuel Fox after 38 years, a jacket in an evidence locker, a Dewey stop on a highway, a detective who refused to send the file back one last time without sending the jacket somewhere first. Subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are in the description. Samuel Fox was 3 years old. He wore a rocket jacket, and after 38 years, he came home.